The call came in at 7:40 on a Wednesday morning, and I almost let it go to voicemail because I was already running behind on a job in Canada, and the coffee I'd grabbed from Tim Hortons was still too hot to drink without burning my mouth. "Hi, this is Marguerite Ossie's assistant calling on her behalf. She's had a pipe burst in the ceiling of her main floor. We need someone out as soon as possible. She was referred to you by a colleague." I asked for the address. When she gave it out loud, I just said, "I can be there by 9. The house was in Rockcliffe Park. If you don't know Ottawa, that tells you everything you need to know. I pulled up and sat in the truck for a second. The driveway was longer than most people's yards. Old stone, ivy on the south face, those big heritage-style windows that never quite seal right in February. The kind of house that has a name somewhere in a deed from 1948. My van looked like it had driven in from a different planet. I grabbed my gear and rang the bell. The woman who answered the door was not the assistant. She was maybe 45, wearing a blazer over what looked like a running top, phone in one hand, reading glasses pushed up on her head like she'd forgotten they were there. She looked at me, then past me at the van, then back. "Joel?" "Yeah, Joel Tran, you called about a burst pipe." She stepped back and let me in. The ceiling in the hallway started dripping around 6. My housekeeper found it. I've been on a call with our property manager for the last hour and he has been spectacularly unhelpful. "Where's the drip coming from?" She pointed. I followed the water stain across the plaster ceiling to a dark ring near the light fixture. Bad sign near a fixture. I asked her to show me the mechanical room, and she led me through the kitchen without another word. She walked fast for someone who'd been dealing with a crisis since 6 in the morning. No panic in it, just efficiency. "The shutoff valve," I said when we got downstairs. "Did anyone turn it?" My housekeeper tried. She said it wouldn't budge. It hadn't just not budged. The previous plumber had installed the wrong valve type for the line pressure in a house this age, and whoever had been doing maintenance hadn't caught it in probably 10 years. I got it closed manually, checked the line, and went back upstairs to trace the full damage. The pipe that had let go was a supply line for the second-floor bathroom, run through an exterior wall. February in Ottawa does what February in Ottawa does. When I came back down, she was standing in the hallway with her phone face down against her thigh, actually waiting. "Here's what happened," I said, and I told her. No softening, no jargon, just the facts in order. Old supply line, inadequate insulation on the exterior wall run, the shutoff valve problem compounding it. One section needed replacing today, and the wall would have to come open to do it right. She looked at me for a moment. "How long?" "Most of today. Maybe into tomorrow morning depending on what I find inside the wall." "Fine." Just like that. No second guessing, no asking if I was sure, no calling a second opinion while I stood there. "Do what you need to do." She turned to go back to whatever she'd been doing before the ceiling started dripping, and I got to work. She checked in twice over the course of the morning. Not hovering, just appearing in the doorway, looking at whatever I was doing, then disappearing again. The second time she brought coffee without asking if I wanted any. Just set it on the floor of the hall beside my tool bag and left. It was good coffee, not from a pod, and I noticed that probably more than I should have. By noon I had the wall open, the damaged section cut out, and a clear picture of what needed replacing. I was cleaning up the temporary fix when she came back and stood in the doorway again. "Hungry?" she said. "I'm all right. There's soup. Carmen made it yesterday and there's enough for 6 people. You're welcome to it if you want." I almost said no again. I don't usually eat at clients' houses. It's a boundary I set early on when I went independent. Just keeps things clean and professional. But I'd been up since 5:30. The Tim Hortons coffee was long gone. And she said it in the same tone she said everything else. Like an offer, not a performance. "Sure," I said. "Thanks." She heated it up herself in the kitchen while I washed my hands at the utility sink in the laundry room. The kitchen was the size of my entire apartment, and she moved around it like she didn't notice that. Set 2 bowls on the island, sat down on one of the stools, and pointed me to the other. The soup was a West African groundnut stew, rich and warm, and I told her so. She looked slightly surprised, like she hadn't expected me to recognize it. "My mother's recipe," she said. "Carmen's been with us 12 years, she can make it better than I can at this point." "Where's she from?" "Your family, I mean." "Ghana originally. I grew up here, but we spent summers there until I was about 16. She paused. "You?" "Born here. Parents came from Vietnam in the 80s. She nodded like that was enough, and it was. We ate without filling the silence with anything unnecessary, which I found I liked. "What's the rest of the job going to involve?" she asked after a while. I told her. The new supply line, closing the wall back up, re-insulating properly, addressing the valve situation. She listened without interrupting, then asked 2 very specific questions about the insulation spec. The kind of questions most homeowners don't know to ask, which told me she'd done some research during the morning while I was working. "You looked it up," I said. She didn't look apologetic. I like to understand what I'm agreeing to. Fair enough, I meant it. Clients who've done their homework are easier to work with, not harder. The short answer is that whoever insulated this wall last time used the wrong R value for an Ottawa exterior run. Should have been at minimum R22, it was R12. That's a freeze waiting to happen. And was that something a competent plumber would have caught? Yes. She absorbed that, then said the previous plumber came highly recommended. Recommendations only go as far as the last job someone actually checked. That got a short laugh out of her. Just one, but it was real. I'm going to write that down. I finished the job late that afternoon. The new section was in, the wall was closed and patched. She'd have to get a painter in for the plaster, but the structural work was done. The valve was replaced. The insulation was correct. I walked her through everything before I packed up, same way I always do. She asked questions that were good questions and listened to the answers. When I handed her the invoice, she looked at it briefly, then looked at me. This is less than I was quoted by the first plumber I called this morning. I charge what the job is worth. Is that your standard approach? It's my only approach. She signed the service form and handed it back. You did good work, she said. That's not a small thing. I said thank you and meant it, picked up my gear and headed for the door. Joel. I turned. She was standing with her arms loosely crossed, very still. I'm gonna need someone to look at the rest of the plumbing in this house. It's the same age as the pipe that just failed, and I'm starting to think the previous maintenance history is less than reliable. Would you be available for a full assessment? I can schedule that. Give me a date. She found her phone, we agreed on a time, and I walked out into the February dark and got in the van and sat there for probably 45 seconds longer than I needed to. It was nothing, it was a job, a satisfied client, a return booking. That's what every tradesman wants. I started the engine and pulled out of the driveway and turned on the radio and told myself I wasn't still thinking about the way she'd said, "You did good work," like she'd meant to say something slightly different. I came back 10 days later for the assessment. Different energy in the house. No crisis, no dripping ceiling, no assistant on the phone in the background. Quieter. She answered the door herself again. The assessment took about 3 hours. I moved through the house methodically, checked every fixture, every valve, every visible run, photographed the access panels and the mechanical room. She had work of her own to do and she did it, but at some point in the afternoon she started following me room to room. Not talking much, just there. At one point I was checking the pipe run in the upstairs bathroom and I said, almost to myself, this elbow fitting here is original to the house. Probably 1955, is that a problem? Not yet. But it'll tell on itself eventually, always does. She was quiet for a moment. My father used to say something like that about people. I kept working. Smart man. He was, past tense, and she said it simply, without the careful distance people sometimes put around grief. Just a fact she was comfortable with. We ended up at the kitchen island again afterward while I walked her through the full report. Some things needed attention in the next year. A few things were fine for now but worth watching. Nothing was critical, which was the good news after the supply line scare. When I finished, she closed the folder I'd printed for her and said, "This is the most organized thing anyone has given me related to this house in 12 years. It's just documentation. Most people treat documentation like an afterthought." She looked at me for a second. "You're not most people." I didn't know what to do with that exactly. I said, "It's part of the job." "Right," she said, and something in the way she said it suggested she didn't entirely believe that. I packed up. She walked me to the door. At the threshold she said, "There's a concern I didn't put on the list because I didn't want it on paper." I stopped. "The boiler," she said. "It's been making a sound for about a month. A knocking sound, intermittent. The property manager said it was probably nothing. Property managers say that about a lot of things. I'm starting to notice that." She paused. "Could you come back and have a look? Off the record isn't what I mean. I'll pay you for the time. I just wanted to see what you said before I started another formal process." "I can do that. When works for you." She named an evening the following week and I said I'd be there. Driving home that night, the city lights spread out on both sides of the 417. I admitted something to myself I'd been dodging since the first visit. She was interesting. Not just the house, not just the job. Her, the way she talked, the way she listened, the way she laughed exactly once when something was actually funny and not before. The way she didn't apologize for knowing things or for asking hard questions. I also knew the math of it, and it was not a comfortable math. She lived in Rockcliffe Park. I drove a van. We were not in the same chapter of anything, and I was not the kind of person who confused a good client for something else. I told myself that and mostly believed it. The evening I came back to look at the boiler, she answered the door in different clothes. Not the blazer and running top, just a soft dark sweater and jeans, like she'd already come home from wherever the day had taken her. It looked more like her, somehow. The blazer version was the one for other people. The boiler was fine, as it turned out. The knocking was an air pocket in the return line. An easy bleed, 10 minutes of work. I told her and she looked briefly disappointed in the simplicity of it, like she'd expected a more interesting problem. That's it? That's it? That seems anticlimactic. Most things are when you catch them early enough. She made a sound that was almost a laugh. Stay for dinner, she said. Carmen's made too much again and I'm eating alone. You'd be doing me a favor. I told myself on the way to the kitchen that this was still just a client dinner. Perfectly ordinary. Professionals did this all the time. Carmen had made jollof rice and chicken, and there was enough for a small family. We ate at the kitchen island again because the dining room, Marguerite said, was for when she needed people to feel a certain way about her, and she didn't need that tonight. I liked that she said it plainly like that. We talked differently that evening. Not about the house. She asked about my work, how I'd started, why I went independent instead of staying with one of the larger operations in the city. I told her about the 3 years with a company in Nepean that was good enough but felt like someone else's idea of success. How I'd saved enough to buy the van outright and just started. It was terrifying for about a year and then it wasn't. What made it stop being terrifying, she asked. I stopped comparing it to what it would have looked like if I'd done it differently. She rested her chin in her hand and looked at me. I need to try that. What keeps you from it? She was quiet for a moment. In my line of work, the comparison is built into everything. Every meeting, every report, every quarter. You're always being measured against something. What do you do? Corporate law. Mergers and acquisitions mostly. That explained a lot. The precision of her questions, the way she listened for what wasn't being said, the way she'd signed off on the job that first day with zero drama and total authority. You're good at it, I said. Not a question, I am. No false modesty, no deflection, just a fact. I'm also exhausted by it in a way I haven't quite found the language for yet. The kitchen was quiet. Outside the window, the February trees were dark against the streetlights. My dad was a structural engineer, I said. He worked for the same firm for 30 years and I don't think he was unhappy exactly. But there was something he used to do after dinner every night. Go out to the garage and work on whatever broken appliance he'd picked up at a garage sale. Toaster, radio, lamp. Didn't matter what it was. He'd just work until it was fixed. Did he sell them? Never. Gave them away mostly. It wasn't about the money. It was about having something in his hands where the problem and the solution were the same size. Marguerite was very still for a moment. Then she said, that's exactly it. That's the thing I can't find. Something where the problem and the solution are the same size. After that, the conversation didn't feel like two people being polite. It felt like two people who'd accidentally told the truth and found out the other person had been waiting for that. When I finally left sometime past 9, she walked me to the door again. The night was sharp and cold, that particular dry Ottawa cold that gets into your collar no matter what. Thank you, she said, for the boiler. And for the other part. What other part? The part that wasn't about the boiler. I drove home and sat with that for a long time. I did not contact her after that. That was deliberate. Whatever was happening in that house was something I needed to see clearly, and I couldn't see it clearly if I was the one making it happen, so I waited. She called on a Thursday, just over 2 weeks later. Not her assistant this time, her. The kitchen tap is dripping, she said. Badly. I know it's probably a washer, probably. A pause. Would you come and look at it anyway? Tomorrow morning work? Tomorrow morning is perfect. It was a washer, $12 part, 15 minutes of work. We both knew that when she called and she knew that I knew it and I came anyway. When I finished, she brought coffee and stood across the island from me. Something in the room had changed from the previous visits. Less negotiation in it. Like a decision had been quietly made somewhere in the middle of all those visits. And we were both already on the other side of it. I've been thinking, she said, about what you said about your father and the garage. It stuck with you. A lot of things you say stick with me. She said it directly, not looking away. I don't mean that carelessly. I set down the coffee cup. Marguerite, I know, she said. I know the version of this where it's a bad idea. I've run it through my head more than once. You're a contractor I hired. That's a real concern. It is. But I'm also 46 years old and I have gotten very good at knowing the difference between something that's convenient and something that's real. And this is not convenient. She paused. If I'm reading this wrong, tell me. I'd rather know. I looked at her. The morning light was coming in through the south windows. Very clear, that particular winter light that doesn't soften anything. She looked the same in it as she looked in every other kind of light. Like herself. You're not reading it wrong, I said. She let out a breath, small, controlled, but real. Good. I wasn't sure. How weren't you sure? Because you're very hard to read. That's the second time someone said that to me in my life. My mother says the same thing. That got a real laugh, the kind I'd been hearing in pieces up to then. It changed her whole face. We didn't make it into anything official that morning. We just talked for another hour, and when I left we had plans to get dinner the following weekend, and that felt like enough. Over the next several weeks, whatever it was took its time becoming what it was. She was careful with it in a way I respected. She didn't introduce me to anyone, didn't make announcements, and neither did I. We went to dinner in Westboro once, then a place in the Byward Market the week after. She ordered in French without performing it, and tipped like someone who had worked a service job at some point, and hadn't forgotten what it was. That mattered to me. She was different outside the house than I'd expected. In the house she was contained, precise. In a restaurant waiting for food, she was wry in a way that snuck up on you. She'd say something completely dry at exactly the right moment, and then pick up her water glass like nothing had happened. The first time she did it, I looked at her for a full second before I caught the humor, and she looked back with this very small private smile that said she'd seen me catch it. I started to look forward to that specific expression, more than I was comfortable admitting. There were harder conversations too. They didn't wait long to arrive. One evening she'd had a bad week. I could tell from the first thing she said on the phone, and the second thing, and the silences between them. And I picked up food from a Vietnamese place near Carling that my aunt ran and brought it to the house. We sat in the kitchen, and she talked about the deal she'd been working for 8 months, that had collapsed in 2 days due to something she couldn't have prevented, but would have to explain to 12 people who would look for someone to blame anyway. I listened. I didn't try to fix it. I don't know enough about mergers law to fix anything about that world, and she wasn't asking me to. She was just asking me to be there while the weight of it came down. When she stopped, there was a long silence. Then she said, "No one ever just sits with me." "What do you mean?" "People in my life, when something goes wrong, they offer solutions or they minimize it or they start talking about themselves. You just let me say it. You didn't need a solution. You have a solution. You needed to say it out loud." She looked at me for a long time. "Yes," she said quietly. "That is exactly right." Later she asked me something I hadn't been waiting for and therefore had no prepared answer to. "Are you embarrassed by this?" "By what?" "By the difference in everything. My house, the world I move in. I've seen you go quiet sometimes when I mention certain things, a name, an event. I can't tell if it's discomfort or if I'm imagining it." I thought about it honestly. "Not embarrassed," I said. "Aware. There's a difference." "What are you aware of?" "That you have a life that involves things I've never been part of. That some of those things are going to come up. That when they do, I'm not going to be able to pretend I'm something I'm not. I've never asked you to be anything you're not. I know that." "Then what's the actual fear?" I'd been sitting with this for weeks and I gave her the real version. That I'm interesting to you now because I'm not what you're used to. And that interesting stops being interesting eventually. She didn't answer right away. I heard the house settle the way old houses do, and outside a snowplow went slowly up the street. "I understand why you'd think that," she said finally, "and I can't prove it to you by saying it isn't true. The only way that gets answered is by time." She paused. "But I'll tell you what I know right now. The last person I was serious about spoke my language perfectly. We understood the same references, knew the same people, could walk into any room together and hold a conversation. And he was also the loneliest I have ever felt in my life." She looked at me directly. "What I'm looking for is not someone who fits the pattern. What I'm looking for is someone who is actually here when I'm talking." I didn't answer. I looked at the table, then back at her. "Joel," she said, "you are the only person who has sat in my kitchen in 3 years who I did not have to perform for. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" I understood. It didn't make the fear go away entirely, but it moved it to a different part of the room. Things settled after that conversation, easier, more natural. She started texting me things with no particular purpose. A photo of the sunset over the Ottawa River from her office window. A question about whether I thought gas fireplaces were inherently lazy. A note that said she'd found a Vietnamese restaurant near Elgin that I needed to try, and was I free Saturday. I started texting back the same way. It became normal faster than I expected. The first time I stayed over was quiet. No drama around it. We'd been at the house watching something she'd recommended and it got late, and the roads were icy and she said the guest room was made up if I didn't feel like driving. We both knew that wasn't what she meant, and I stayed in her room, and in the morning she made very strong coffee and stood at the counter, in an oversized cardigan, looking more relaxed than I'd ever seen her. She did not look like someone unsure of herself. She looked like someone who had made a choice and was at peace with it. I was less at peace with it. Only because I kept waiting for the other shoe. I'd grown up careful in ways I couldn't entirely explain. Son of immigrants who'd built something from nothing, and knew exactly how quickly things could be taken. and that carefulness was not easy to put down even when there was no particular reason to hold it. She picked up on it in the way she picked up on everything. One Sunday afternoon, I was helping her rehang a heavy painting that had come off the wall hook. She'd called the handyman, and he'd canceled, and I was there anyway. And when we got it level, she stepped back and then turned and looked at me with her head tilted slightly. "What are you afraid's going to happen?" she said. "I'm not afraid of anything. You've been bracing for something for a month." I leaned against the wall. "I don't know where this goes, Marguerite. I know what this feels like right now. I don't know what it looks like in a year." "Neither do I," she said. "Nobody does. That's a lot easier to say from some positions than others." She was quiet for a moment. Then slowly, "Say the rest." I said it, the real version, the one I'd been not saying for weeks. That the gap between our lives wasn't uncomfortable and private, but that the world outside these walls was a different conversation. And I didn't know if I was a chapter in her life or something longer. And that not knowing was starting to sit in my chest in a way I couldn't quite put down. She listened to all of it. When I finished, she looked at me for a long moment with that still, direct look that I'd come to understand meant she was thinking seriously and not performing. "Come with me," she said. She went to the study at the back of the house. It was different from the other rooms. No polish to it, books pulled at odd angles, a drafting table by the window covered in what looked like architectural sketches. I hadn't been in this room before. "What is all this?" "Urban planning," she said. "Specifically affordable housing projects in the Vanya and Lowertown area. I've been working on this for 2 years pro bono with a coalition of community organizations." She paused. "Nobody at the firm knows. It's not the kind of thing that fits the image." I looked at the sketches, the marked-up maps, the stack of neighborhood council notes. "Why are you showing me this?" she said. "This is the room I go when I want to be what I actually am, and you're the only person I've shown it to." I stood there looking at the drafting table. The same feeling as the first time she'd said something that got past all my logic. Not a rush, not drama, just a quiet settling, like something that had been held in tension for months finally finding the right place. "I want to know more about it," I said. She smiled then. Not the small private smile from the restaurants, something more open. "Good," she said. 2 weeks after that, I got a text from her on a Tuesday evening that just said, "Are you finished for the day?" I was. She picked me up outside my building in her car and drove us out past Manatik, down along the river where the ice was still thick enough that you could see people had been skating earlier in the day. She parked and we walked along the bank, and the cold had gone from brutal to that specific late February, almost thaw where the air smells different, like the season is deciding something. We walked without saying much for a while. Then she said, "I've been offered a position." "What kind?" "Senior partner at a firm in Toronto. I've been headhunted for a year. They made a formal offer last week." I kept walking. The ice creaked faintly in the river. "Are you taking it?" "I turned it down this morning." I looked at her. "Why?" She stopped walking and faced the river. "Because I have a house I've never actually lived in. Because I have a room full of work I've been hiding for 2 years. Because I'm 46 and I've spent 20 of those years optimizing for the wrong thing." She looked at me then. "And because when I thought about what Toronto would mean, the first thing I thought about was not the firm and not the money. It was who I was going to call on a Tuesday when the day finally stopped." The wind off the river was sharp. A crow crossed the pale sky from east to west. "Marguerite," I said. "I'm not asking you to be responsible for the decision," she said. "I made it for myself, but I wanted you to know what was in the room when I made it." I looked at her in the gray late February light, the river behind her, the ice and the bare trees. She looked the same in it as she always looked, like herself entirely, with nothing performed. "I'm glad you stayed," I said. She looked at me for a moment. "So am I." On the drive back, she asked me something that had been nowhere in the air between us. "You mentioned once you'd been thinking about expanding. A second van, maybe a part-time hire." "I've been turning it over. I know some people on the East End zoning committee. There's a commercial unit coming available on St. Laurent that could work as a small base of operations. I can connect you if you'd like." I looked at her. "You don't have to do that." "I know I don't have to." She glanced over at me from the driver's seat, very briefly. "I do it because you talk about what you're building like it's far away, and I don't think it needs to be." I didn't have an answer for that right away. We drove back along the river road, the lights of the city coming up in the distance, the radio low. She drove the same way she did everything, without making a statement of it, without asking for anything back. After a long time I said, "You say things like they're small when they're not." She made a sound of quiet surprise. "You told me that about myself months ago." "I know, seems true in both directions." A small sound, almost a laugh. "It does," she said. We got back into the city and she parked outside my building and I sat there in the warm car for a moment with the engine still running. The unit on Saint Laurent, I said. I'd like the introduction. She nodded, looking forward, a small steady smile on her face. I'll set it up, she said. I got out and watched the car until the taillights disappeared around the corner. And then I stayed there on the sidewalk in the cold for a minute longer, because that was all mine and I needed a second with it. Whatever I'd been telling myself this was, I knew what it actually was. And for the first time since that first February morning in Rockcliffe Park, I wasn't bracing against it. I was ready for it to be real.